Join me in welcoming Peter Montoya. Hey, Peter, how you doing today?
Stephen, I'm doing great. Good seeing you.
It's great seeing you too. Your book is called The Second Civil War, A Citizen's Guide to Healing Our Fractured Nation. We want to talk about the book, but first, tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world.
It's a great question. I'm a speaker, I'm an author, and I'm also an entrepreneur. I've been all three of those things now for almost 30 years. I've owned and started 12 different companies, published 4 best-selling books, and delivered 3,000 or 4,000 different keynote trainings and or presentations. So I'm a little bit unusual in the world. A lot of entrepreneurs try to write books and do speaking, but those two skill sets, both writing, creating content, and speaking and entrepreneuring, are all squarely in my wheelhouse.
So, I mean, even the title is kind of ominous. The Second Civil War. Mm-hmm. All of us have seen pictures, even maybe been to reenactments of the Civil War. First, just kind of give us an outline of what you're meaning by the phrase "the Second Civil War."
Yeah, hot civil wars is what we experienced back in 1861, where you have two different armies aligning on a battlefield, trying to annihilate each other. 620,000 American soldiers on both sides of those two different armies died in that war, which was almost 3% of our population. Today, I would say we're still in a second civil war, but it's largely a cold civil war. And a cold war is everything that's not violent. And so this is largely a social civil war, and it's happening between friends and family and coworkers and people in the public. Almost everybody I know has either lost or has a severely damaged relationship with somebody else they know over political lines. So we are in the Second Civil War. This is not something that's forthcoming. It just happens to be cold, but it's affecting every single one of us at a very personal and painful level.
So, without getting into all the nuances of, I love history, so we won't go into the depths of all of the causes of the First Civil War, but, broad strokes, it was kind of a fight over slavery.
Yes.
So what is if there is a way to be able to broad stroke, what is the cause for this Civil War?
Great question, because you're right. The First Civil War had very clear dividing lines. It was federal versus state powers and slavery. Everyone knew exactly what that war was about. When we ask, are these two sides fighting over? What are they fighting over? And I'm going to oversimplify things. There are some real policy distinctions. I'm going to put those aside for right now. But in large part, what this war is about is the other side is crazy. They have a separate reality from what I have. They are trying to destroy the country. We can't move forward without them. That's a very oversimplified view about what this war is about. It's basically that we've been told, conditioned, indoctrinated by the media to believe that the other side is absolutely terrible, unlivable, and that we can't proceed in a country with them.
So, before the First Civil War happened, you had roughly half, we won't get to the exact numbers, but roughly half of the states that seceded from being part of the United States. Is there a possibility of there actually being fracturing where the 50 United States are now, whatever other countries they want to call themselves?
No.
At that level?
Yeah, so every once in a while I see that Facebook post that says the East Coast and the West Coast, where all the liberals are going to peel away and the center of the country is going to be a Republican. It's just not going to happen. So what we could see is, if this escalates, is the continuation of violence like we saw in 2020. So about 32 people died last year because of political divisions. And this happened in the riots in major cities. It happened because of terrorist attacks like bombings and shootings, and they were awful. We haven't quite had that many this year, and I hope it doesn't perpetuate, but it's really unlikely we see any kind of division that way. We are way too interconnected, and the business of our country is business. And the chances of any major corporation backing the division of separation of actual geography is next to impossible, next to zero. And without money to actually fund two different sides or two different armies, it's just not going to happen.
That's such a good point, because you hear people talk about, well, and Texas is just going to secede. And it's like, well,
the business of America is business. And actually, I give him a lot of kudos. It sounds a little cynical, but actually, business is what has been keeping us cooperating. So, in one way, there's been this awful tearing of our fabric. We've heard this expression, the tearing of social fabric, and that is we feel alienated from our friends, and we've been defriended on Facebook, and we get into yelling arguments, and we decide we can't see people anymore. It's really painful, and it's really bad for our country. And in other regards, American business has completely soldiered on in the last 12 years or the last 4 years. Our economy keeps growing. So we are all very good participants in making sure that we're consumers and buying things and then contributing our labor and our entrepreneurship to keep building businesses. And so that part of the fabric of our country is still doing relatively well.
So, and I want to try to not get too controversial because we don't want to chase people away, but one of the issues is the definition of terms. What is our country? Is it a democracy? Is it a democratic republic? Is it, should we become a socialist country? Do you think that there really is legitimately going to be like a massive political change, like we go from what we are now to Russia, or something like that?
No. And again, because we have the ballast of American business. So any change that happens in our country happens incredibly slowly. So we look back at American history and we kind of pick off these big major events: World War I, World War II, the Civil War, Vietnam, and we look at them. We think of them as kind of these major sea changes, but most likely they were happening over 20 or 30 years before the buildup of something happened, and then the vector change was really only very, very slight. There is a very strong libertarian streak in this country. That means an individualist streak, which means that we want to have the freedom to pursue our own interests without being told what to do by the government. So the chances of our country becoming a socialist country are next to zero. Is it possible that we may have more social institutions? So here are some of the social institutions we currently have in place: fire, medical care, military, Social Security, massive Medicare systems. So there are tons of socialist systems that already exist in our country. Is it possible we might add a couple more over the following decades? Sure. Completely possible. The chances of us becoming a communist, socialist, dictator nation, highly unlikely.
My dad used to always use the phrase, the more things change, the more they are the same. I think to some extent that kind of, really defines how it is. Now, I know one of the other issues is that every 4 years, 2 years for the Congress, but every 4 years we have a presidential election. And really, if you go back through a course of all of history, with the exception of FDR, at least every 8 years, it totally changes. It goes, from Republican to Democrat and back, or, the Whig Party or whatever other, parties there were. Do you think that there would ever really be a time when it's just like a one party kind of a thing? Or is it more likely, we'll get a third party and like a libertarian maybe would even get elected?
Yeah, the two major parties are really entrenched, and the likelihood of them, either one of them being dislodged, becoming irrelevant, or a third party coming into play in any time in the near future is really, really unlikely. So there, every once in a while, are these major upheavals, and we do see radical changes, but it doesn't look likely right now, because it's not just that we have parties and politicians that are pretty equally divided, but on top of that, you have these huge media ecosystems that support both the parties. You have dozens of large media companies, cable, internet, magazines, newspapers, and then you have all the subsidiaries, hundreds, if not thousands, of podcasters and radio shows and television shows, which are aligned and invested in their given parties. It's just really unlikely that there's going to be enough momentum, which someone would need billions of dollars, billions. I can't tell you how many billions of dollars. So even like Jeff Bezos type billions to actually launch a legitimate new third party, it would be really, really hard.
So the book is Second Civil War, but the subtitle is A Citizen's Guide to Healing Our Fractured Nation. Yeah. So let's talk about healing. What can we as citizens do to make it better?
That's a great question, because it really is all in our hands. And the book, I've been talking a lot about these kind of large political overtures, but the book is really written for everyday people. So there is a little bit of political science in the book. There is a little bit of sociology, a little bit of psychology, but it really is written. If you want to sum up what the book's about, it's my view on patriotism. So I don't have a couple things that's really important to know. I don't own the monopoly on truth. My perception of reality is just as delusional as anybody else's. I also don't have a monopoly on what patriotism is, but I had never seen a book written that really described for me in detail exactly how to be a good citizen. So this book really is written for an individual who has lost relationships, watches the news and feels this overwhelming anxiety, who feels frustrated and like they want to pull out their hair because they don't know what to do. The book is really accessible and really written for an everyday American to give them practical ideas to reduce their anxiety, repair their relationships, and then also be more effective in advocating, which we have a responsibility to do in our democracy. And so I'll give you, there's a couple different things we could do. And the first thing you should do is eliminate all media that attacks another American. So I hope that you fight for your ideas and advocate for your ideas. I think it's really important that in the marketplace of our ideas, that ideas are argued and fought for. It's a really good idea. It's very, very important to our democracy. But do not give patronage. Do not pay money, time, or attention to any media personality, politician, political group, media organization that attacks and vilifies other Americans. All it does, two things, is number one, in your mind, it objectifies the other group, which will help you do increasingly more awful things. So whenever you want to hurt somebody else, this happens in Africa all the time, when they have those warlords start attracting young kids, the first thing they do is they objectify the other side. And they start using words and labels to degrade the other side. So hopefully these young kids will go out there and actually do heinous, horrible, murderous things. And the same thing happens here. So we're not killing people, but more on a cold level, that the more we can vilify the other side, the more likely you are to alienate them in some way. So, and the other thing that it does when we vilify somebody else is it further separates them from us. It calcifies them away from us and makes it less likely for them to even enter the public arena to share ideas. So anybody who is actually vilifying another American group, the only party they are benefiting is our enemies. So every single time you attack another American, or you give money or your attention to a podcaster or a news outlet that is vilifying another American, here's the only people who win: Russia, Iran, Iraq, North Korea, China. Without America's leadership, which has really been vacant for the last 5 to 10 years on the national stage, our rivals and our enemies are running the table because we're so busy fighting ourselves. So this kind of sounds hyperbolic, but it's absolutely true. Every single time you attack another American, our enemies and our rivals win.
That's so powerful. And yet, especially with this last year, because we were all locked in for, a year, it seems like we didn't go anywhere for like a year.
Yeah.
And, so a lot of TV was watched, a lot of blog posts, podcasts, all of that. So we're kind of like Cold War version of trench warfare dug in,
Yeah. You're absolutely right. This last year and a half of the pandemic was really terrible because we were kind of locked in and saturated in this tinderbox of hate. And we were constantly being pumped full of fear and hatred of the other side. We didn't have any of the national events that often produce water cooler conversation. We didn't go to the office on Monday morning and say, hey, what did you think about the Super Bowl, the World Series, the NBA finals? Hey, did you hear about this new movie that came out, the new Avengers movie that came out? None of those national unifying stories happened. We couldn't communicate and connect with people on human levels. We couldn't even ask what you did this weekend. So all we were ended up doing was getting pumped full of fear. Then we would go online and see the other side who's being pumped full of fear. And then we would sit there and rage against one another. So yeah, the pandemic was really bad for the festering of the second Civil War this last 18 months. And so first of all, if someone's sitting here going, well, yeah, Peter, the other side needs to hear this. They need to change. Listen, we are a people of personal responsibility. And as a people of personal responsibility, you know the following: you can't change anyone but yourself. So all this change starts with you. Stop pumping your head full of hateful media. Stop attacking other people and realize the only way to help us build our empathy and our ability to cooperate is through relationships. If you don't like someone's opinion on politics or on social issues or on a racial issue, facts won't change their mind. The only thing that will change their mind is being in an empathetic relationship over time.
That is so good. Man, I hope everybody, I wish I had the ability to rewind while we're talking live and play that whole thing again. That was so good. I hope that people that are listening on replay will actually rewind that and listen to it again. So the book is called The Second Civil War, A Citizen's Guide to Healing Our Fractured Nation. It's by Peter Montoya. I am going to drop the link in. You can get it actually today for free on Amazon. Get the ebook, and, you're going to end up wanting to buy the hardcover or the paperback version of it as well. So, Peter, before we go, give people just like a step one. Let's talk to that person who is, again, entrenched, hasn't wanted to change at all. What is one simple thing they can do without feeling like they lost, so not wave the right flag, but that they could do? What's one thing they could do today?
That's great. So one thing they can do today is you stop believing what you think. So there is a concept in sociology called naive realism. And naive realism is where we become disillusioned that our view of reality is reality, and that anybody who does not believe our reality is an idiot. That is called naive realism. Every single human being on this planet, including myself, is delusional. And that's a lowercase d, not a capital D. And delusional means we do not see reality the way that it is. We see the reality the way that we are. Reality is a construct that's been created in your head. So if you are feeling anxious and angry and hateful and resentful and vengeful to any degree against other Americans, you can change that. You can still advocate for your ideas. You will still vote for the candidates and the policies which are in our best interest. You'll just do so being a lot less anxious of a person. So my book, I made it as practical and easy to read as possible. If you've ever picked up a political science book before, it's not broken up. There's no list. There's no quotes. You're just reading for page for page. That's not my book. My book is really, really easy to read. And I've asked my friends whenever they're reading it to bookmark it and to write in it. And what I notice is they are underlining and highlighting and circling circling things. There's tons of practical, really useful information in this book. So please do buy it. Also, please buy a softbound copy of it and give it to that person who you go, why is that? Why are they always angry about politics? Why is that all they could ever talk about? This is the book that will help change the vector of where they're headed. And the other thing I'll tell you in the last is I'm having a hard time getting national media. So I've got a great PR agency. I've got a good name. I put out best-selling books before, but I'm not getting booked on the national news channels. And the reason being is I'm not partisan. They're not interested in this centrist message. But what I've discovered in every single person that I've talked to is they're hungry for this. They want unity. So help me prove the national media wrong. Please buy this book and get yourself dislodged from the war. You, person by person, can pull yourself out of this civil war, and together we can heal our great nation.
Peter, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it, because we need so much more just discussions about unity and helping one another versus, stabbing each other in the back. Yeah. If somebody wants to go deeper with you, is there a way that they can get in contact with you?
Sure. Well, first of all, you can visit my website. My earlier book was on personal branding. So my website is just petermontoya.com, petermontoya.com. And I'm also doing right now free webinars for any group of 20 or more people on this topic. And you may notice that I'm apolitical. I'm nonpartisan. I've got a message of hope and some practical steps. So if you have a company or a group of friends or a church group and you want to do a Zoom call like this, I will do one for you if you got 20 or more people. And you can just contact me, contact my staff at info at petermontoya.com, info at petermontoya.com. Give us the details of your group and we will get a Zoom meeting scheduled, and I will talk in a passionate but nonpartisan way, giving practical ideas on how we all can work together to heal our nation.
I love it. The book is called The Second Civil War, A Citizen's Guide to Healing Our Fractured Nation by Peter Montoya. The link is both in the description as well as in the comments. Do get your free copy today and reach out to Peter. Get a small group of people together. Get some people that you disagree with together and have the only thing you say is, hey, I'm not asking you to change. I'm just asking you, let's both listen with an open heart and see what maybe a difference that can make in our world. Peter, thank you so much for spending some time with us on the show here today.
Stephen, thank you. It was so much fun. I really appreciate you having me.